The roar of the water drowned out her screams as the swollen creek seized Amelia Owens by the ankles and dragged her into its muddy embrace. The spring flood of 1878, turning the normally placid stream into a churning monster that had no mercy for a young woman who had simply been trying to reach the other side. The wooden bridge had collapsed just moments before, and now she was spinning in the current, her skirts tangling around her legs like iron chains, pulling her down into the brown water that tasted of earth and fear. Her lungs burned as she fought to keep her head above the surface, catching desperate gulps of air between waves that crashed over her face. And just when her strength began to fail, just when the darkness at the edges of her vision started to close in, a strong hand clamped around her wrist with such force that she gasped. Owen Quinlan had been riding alongside the creek when he saw the bridge go, had seen the flash of blue fabric disappear into the torrent, and without thinking he had spurred his horse forward, riding parallel to the flood until he could get ahead of her. He threw himself from the saddle, his boots hitting the muddy bank hard enough to jar his teeth, and he waded into the shallows where the current wasn't quite so vicious. When she came spinning past, her face pale and terrified above the water, he lunged forward and caught her, his fingers closing around her slender wrist with an iron grip that he would not release even as the current tried to tear her away from him. "I have you," he shouted over the water's roar, digging his heels into the muddy bottom, using every ounce of strength in his body to pull her toward the bank. "Hold on to me and do not let go." Amelia's other hand shot out and grabbed his forearm, her nails digging into his skin through the wet fabric of his shirt. The current yanked at her legs, trying to reclaim its prize, but Owen was stronger. He hauled her through the water, step by agonizing step, until they were in the shallows and then up onto the muddy bank where they both collapsed, gasping and coughing. Water streamed from Amelia's hair and clothes, pooling beneath her, and she lay there for a long moment, her entire body shaking with cold and shock and the sheer overwhelming relief of still being alive. "Are you hurt?" Owen asked, pushing himself up onto his hands and knees so he could look at her properly. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his blue eyes were sharp with concern as they swept over her, checking for injuries. "I do not think so," Amelia managed, her voice hoarse. She coughed again, expelling creek water from her lungs, and then slowly sat up. Her hands were trembling as she pushed wet strands of auburn hair out of her face. "You saved my life. That water would have carried me all the way to the Rio Grande if you had not been there." "Lucky I was passing by then," Owen said, though his heart was still pounding against his ribs like a hammer. He had seen men drown in flash floods before, had seen what the spring runoff could do when the snows melted up in the mountains, and all that water came rushing down through the arroyos and creeks. Another minute and she would have been gone, swept so far downstream that no one would have found her until it was too late. "Can you stand? We need to get you somewhere warm and dry before you catch your death." Amelia nodded, and Owen helped her to her feet, keeping a steadying hand on her elbow when her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. His horse, a steady bay gelding named Rusty, had stayed nearby, ground tied and calm despite the chaos. Owen led Amelia over to the horse and helped her up into the saddle before swinging up behind her. She was shivering hard now, her teeth chattering, and without hesitation, Owen wrapped one arm around her waist and pulled her back against his chest, sharing what warmth he could. "There is a ranch house about 2 miles from here," he said, gathering the reins with his free hand. "The Hartwell place. Mrs. Hartwell will see you tended to properly." "I was trying to get to Lordsburg," Amelia said, her voice small. "I came from Santa Fe on the stage, but we had to stop at the relay station because the road was washed out." I thought I could walk the rest of the way, cross the creek where the bridge was, but then it just fell apart beneath me." "That bridge was 60 years old if it was a day," Owen said, urging Rusty into an easy walk. The horse picked his way carefully over the muddy ground, away from the still roaring creek. "Should have been replaced years ago, but no one wanted to pay for it. Guess now they will have to." Amelia was quiet for a moment, focusing on breathing, on the solid warmth of the man behind her and the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. Her heart was still racing, adrenaline still flooding her veins, but slowly the panic was ebbing away, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. She had come so close to dying, closer than she had ever been in her 22 years of life, and it left her feeling strange and unmoored, as if the world had tilted on its axis. "What is your name?" she asked finally, turning her head slightly so she could see his profile. "Owen Quinlan," he answered. "I work at the Broken Arrow Ranch about 10 miles south of Lordsburg. Been there 3 years now." "Amelia Owens," she said. "I am the new school teacher. I was supposed to start in Lordsburg next week, but I wanted to arrive early to get settled." Owen felt something shift in his chest at that, though he could not have said exactly what. There was something about this woman, something beyond the fact that he had just pulled her half-drowned from a flood. Maybe it was the way she held herself, even soaked and shivering with a kind of quiet dignity. Maybe it was the intelligence in her green eyes, or the determined set of her jaw. Or maybe it was simply that in that moment when he had grabbed her wrist and felt her hand close around his arm in return, something had sparked between them, a connection forged in crisis that felt deeper than it should. The Hartwell ranch house appeared ahead, a low adobe structure with a red tile roof and smoke rising from the chimney. Owen guided Rusty up to the front porch and dismounted, then lifted Amelia down, his hands spanning her waist. "Mrs. Hartwell," a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, appeared in the doorway and took one look at them before ushering Amelia inside with a flurry of concerned questions. Owen waited on the porch, dripping water onto the wooden planks while Mrs. Hartwell disappeared with Amelia into the back of the house. Mr. Hartwell emerged after a few minutes with a cup of hot coffee and a blanket, which Owen accepted gratefully. The older man listened as Owen explained what had happened, his weathered face growing grave. "That bridge finally gave way then," Mr. Hartwell said, shaking his head. "Been saying it would happen. Lucky you were there, son. Real lucky." "Yes, sir," Owen agreed, wrapping his hands around the tin cup and letting the heat seep into his cold fingers. He could still feel the ghost of Amelia's wrist in his hand, could still see her face white with terror above the brown water. The image would probably haunt his dreams for weeks. Inside the house, Amelia was wrapped in warm blankets and sitting by the fire with her own cup of hot coffee, her hair beginning to dry in the heat. Mrs. Hartwell had given her a dress to wear while her own clothes dried, and though it was too large, it was clean and warm, and Amelia was grateful beyond words. She could not stop thinking about the moment Owen's hand had closed around her wrist, the absolute certainty in his grip, the way he had looked at her with those intense blue eyes and told her to hold on. She had never believed in fate or destiny, had always been too practical for such notions, but something about this day felt significant in a way she could not quite name. Mrs. Hartwell fussed over her, bringing more coffee and some bread with butter, and Amelia ate mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She could hear the low rumble of male voices from the porch, Owen's voice distinctive even through the walls, and she found herself straining to listen. When Owen finally came inside at Mrs. Hartwell's insistence, he had dried off somewhat and his color had returned. His eyes found Amelia immediately, and he crossed the room to where she sat by the fire. "How are you feeling?" he asked, crouching down so they were at eye level. "Better," Amelia said, and it was true. The warmth was seeping back into her bones, though she still felt shaky. "Thank you again for what you did. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "No need for repayment," Owen said firmly. "Any decent man would have done the same." "Perhaps," Amelia said, "but you were the one who was there. You were the one who risked yourself to save me." Something passed between them in that moment, a look that lasted just a heartbeat too long to be casual. Owen felt his pulse quicken, felt that strange pull toward her again, and he had to force himself to stand and step back before he did something foolish like reach out and touch her face. "I should get back to the ranch," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "My boss will be wondering where I got to, but I can come back tomorrow to check on you, make sure you are all right." "I would like that," Amelia said softly, and the smile she gave him made his heart skip a beat. Mr. Hartwell offered to take Amelia into Lordsburg the next day once she was fully recovered, and she accepted gratefully. Owen rode back to the Broken Arrow Ranch as the sun was beginning to set, his thoughts full of auburn hair and green eyes and the feel of a slender wrist in his hand. He had been a cowboy for most of his adult life, had spent his 26 years moving from ranch to ranch, never putting down roots, never finding a reason to stay in one place for long. But something had changed today. Something had shifted. The next morning, Owen asked for the day off and rode back to the Hartwell place, his heart beating faster than it should have. He told himself he was just checking on a person he had helped, making sure she was well, but he knew it was more than that. When Amelia came out onto the porch, her face lighting up at the sight of him, he knew she felt it too. "I thought you might want some company on the ride into Lordsburg," Owen said, dismounting. "If you do not mind doubling up on my horse again." "I would be grateful for the company," Amelia said, and the smile she gave him was warm enough to melt the lingering chill from his bones. They rode into Lordsburg together, Amelia sitting in front of Owen again, though this time there was no emergency, no life or death urgency. This time she was simply aware of his arm around her waist, of the solid warmth of his chest against her back, of the way her heart seemed to beat in time with the rhythm of the horse's hooves. They talked as they rode, easily and naturally, as if they had known each other for years instead of barely a day. Owen told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 17 and heading west to make his own way. Amelia told him about her childhood in Boston, about her love of teaching, about her desire to see more of the country and make a real difference in young lives. Lordsburg was a small town, dusty and sun-baked, with a main street lined with false-fronted buildings and hitching posts. Owen helped Amelia down in front of the boarding house where she would be staying, and she stood there for a moment, looking up at him, not quite ready to say goodbye. "Will I see you again?" she asked, and there was a vulnerability in her voice that made his chest ache. "Count on it," Owen said. "I come into town most Saturdays for supplies. Maybe I could take you to dinner at the hotel restaurant. They serve a decent meal." "I would like that very much," Amelia said, and the happiness in her eyes was unmistakable. Owen rode back to the ranch feeling lighter than he had in years. And when Saturday came around, he took extra care with his appearance, washing up thoroughly and putting on his best shirt. He arrived at the boarding house at exactly 6 o'clock and found Amelia waiting for him on the porch, wearing a simple green dress that brought out her eyes. She had pinned her auburn hair up, though a few curls had escaped to frame her face, and Owen thought she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Dinner at the hotel restaurant was a success. They talked and laughed, sharing stories and learning more about each other with every passing minute. Owen learned that Amelia loved to read, that she had a quick wit and a sharp mind, that she was passionate about education and believed every child deserved a chance to learn. Amelia learned that Owen was more than just a cowboy, that he read Shakespeare when he could get his hands on a book, that he dreamed of owning his own ranch someday, that beneath his quiet exterior was a man of depth and feeling. As the weeks passed, their courtship deepened. Owen came into town every Saturday without fail, and they would walk together through the dusty streets, or sit on the boarding house porch and talk until the stars came out. Sometimes they would ride out into the countryside together. Amelia side-saddle on a gentle mare that Owen borrowed from the livery stable, and he would show her the wild beauty of New Mexico, the endless sky and the red rock formations, and the way the light turned everything gold at sunset. Amelia threw herself into her work at the small schoolhouse, teaching children ranging from 6 to 14, and she loved every minute of it. But no matter how busy her days were, she found herself thinking about Owen, counting down the hours until Saturday when she would see him again. She had never felt this way about anyone before, had never understood what all the fuss was about when her friends back in Boston talked about falling in love. Now she understood completely. Love was this warmth in her chest when she saw him ride into town, this flutter in her stomach when he smiled at her, this certainty that she had found something rare and precious and worth holding on to. One Saturday in June, 3 months after Amelia had nearly drowned in that spring flood, Owen took her on a picnic by a different creek, one that ran clear and gentle through a meadow full of wildflowers. They ate sandwiches and drank lemonade, and then they lay on the blanket and watched clouds drift across the blue sky, their hands intertwined between them. "Amelia," Owen said finally, turning onto his side so he could look at her properly. His heart was hammering in his chest, but he had never been more certain of anything in his life. "These past 3 months have been the best of my life. You have changed everything for me. I know I do not have much to offer right now, just a cowboy's wages and a bunk at the ranch, but I have been saving money for years, and I am close to having enough to buy some land and start my own place. What I am trying to say, and doing a poor job of it, is that I love you. I have loved you since the moment I pulled you out of that flood, maybe even before that in some way I cannot explain, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me." Amelia sat up, her eyes shining with tears, and cupped his face in her hands. "Owen Quinlan, I love you too. I have loved you from that first moment when you told me to hold on, and I just knew that everything would be all right as long as you were there. Yes, I will marry you. 1,000 times yes." Owen kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Amelia kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope and joy into it. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling so wide their faces hurt, and Owen felt as if his heart might burst from happiness. They were married in August in the small church in Lordsburg, with half the town in attendance. Amelia wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Owen wore his best suit, purchased new for the occasion. Mrs. Hartwell cried happy tears, and Mr. Hartwell shook Owen's hand with genuine warmth. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed his bride with a tenderness that made several of the ladies in attendance sigh with romantic envy. Owen had indeed saved enough money to buy land, 200 acres of good grazing land just outside Lordsburg with a year-round creek running through it. The land came with a small house, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was sturdy and well built, and Amelia loved it on sight. They moved in the day after the wedding, and Amelia threw herself into making it a home, hanging curtains and planting a garden and filling the rooms with warmth and love. Owen worked harder than he ever had in his life, building up his herd, repairing fences, digging a well. He hired himself out to neighboring ranches when they needed extra hands, and Amelia continued teaching at the schoolhouse, contributing her salary to their savings. It was hard work, often backbreaking, but they were building something together, creating a life and a future, and that made every difficult day worthwhile. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch and watch the sun set, Amelia leaning against Owen's side, his arm around her shoulders. They would talk about their dreams, about the ranch they were building, about the family they hoped to have someday. Sometimes Owen would read aloud from whatever book Amelia had borrowed from the small collection at the schoolhouse, his deep voice bringing the words to life. Sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, content to be together. Their first year of marriage was filled with small joys and occasional challenges. There were droughts that made them worry about the cattle, and there were unexpected expenses that ate into their savings. But there were also good times, like the day their first calf was born, a sturdy little bull that Owen sold for a good price. There was the evening Amelia surprised Owen with his favorite meal after a particularly long day. There was the morning they woke to find snow covering the ground, rare for Lordsburg, and they had run outside like children to marvel at it. In the spring of 1880, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. She told Owen over breakfast one morning, simply and directly, and the look of pure joy that spread across his face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her so gently as if she might break, and whispered his love and gratitude into her hair. The pregnancy was not easy. Amelia suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and Owen would hold her hair back and bring her cool water and worry endlessly. As she grew bigger, the summer heat became oppressive, and Owen rigged up a system of wet sheets to help keep the house cool. He was attentive and caring, sometimes overly so, insisting she rest and not overwork herself. Amelia, used to being independent and active, chafed at the restrictions but understood they came from love. She had to stop teaching at the schoolhouse when she was 7 months along, and she missed her students terribly, but the school board had insisted. It was not proper for a woman in her condition to be in the classroom, they said, though Amelia privately thought that was nonsense. Still, she used the time to prepare for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, turning the loft into a nursery. Their son was born on a cold November night after a long and difficult labor that left Owen pacing the floor downstairs, while the midwife attended to Amelia. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he practically ran up the ladder to the loft, and the sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Amelia, exhausted but radiant, was holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket, and when she pulled the fabric back to show him their son's face, Owen felt tears slip down his cheeks. "He is perfect," Owen whispered, kneeling beside the bed and reaching out with one finger to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. The infant's fingers closed around Owen's finger with surprising strength, and Owen felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is absolutely perfect. I want to name him James," Amelia said softly, looking down at their son with wonder. "After your father." Owen's throat tightened with emotion. His father had been a good man, taken too soon, and the fact that Amelia wanted to honor his memory this way meant more than he could say. "James Quinlan," he said, testing the name. I like that very much." Those early months with James were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. The baby was healthy and strong-lunged, making his needs known at all hours of the day and night. Owen and Amelia took turns walking the floor with him when he was fussy, took turns getting up for the middle of the night feedings. Owen would sometimes doze off in the rocking chair with James asleep on his chest, and Amelia would find them like that, and her heart would melt at the sight. As James grew, so did the ranch. Owen's careful management and hard work were paying off, and their herd was growing steadily. They hired a young man named Tom to help with the work, a kid of 18 who was eager to learn and willing to work hard. With the extra help, Owen could spend more time with Amelia and James, and he treasured every moment. When James was 2 years old, still toddling around on unsteady legs and getting into everything, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the summer of 1883, they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Sarah, and she had her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. Owen was completely smitten, this tiny girl who wrapped him around her little finger from the moment she was born. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. Owen and Amelia raised their children with love and attention, teaching them right from wrong, instilling in them the values of hard work and kindness. The ranch continued to prosper, and by the time James was 10 and Sarah was 8, they had one of the most successful spreads in the area. Owen hired more hands, built a bigger barn, expanded the house to include more rooms. They were no longer struggling young newlyweds but established ranchers, respected members of the community. Amelia never went back to teaching at the schoolhouse, but she taught her own children at home, making sure they could read and write and cipher as well as any child in town. She also volunteered to teach Sunday school at the church, finding ways to share her love of learning with the next generation. Owen served on the town council for a few years, using his position to finally get that bridge over the creek, replaced with a sturdy new structure that would not collapse in the spring floods. As the years passed, Owen and Amelia's love only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course, the normal friction of two people building a life together, but they always talked things through, always remembered that they were on the same team. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Owen took Amelia back to the meadow where he had proposed, and they had another picnic, laughing about how young and uncertain they had been back then, marveling at everything they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked as they lay on the blanket, older now but no less in love. Leaving Boston, coming out here to the middle of nowhere, marrying a cowboy. Amelia turned to look at him, her green eyes serious. "Not for one single second," she said firmly. "You gave me a life I never could have imagined, Owen. You gave me love and a home and a family. You gave me everything that matters. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Owen kissed her then, slow and deep, and Amelia kissed him back with all the passion and tenderness of a decade spent loving this man. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling, and Owen thought about that day by the flooded creek, about the moment he had grabbed her wrist and pulled her to safety. He had not known then that he was saving not just her life but his own, that this woman would become his whole world. James grew up to be a fine young man, strong and capable, with his father's work ethic and his mother's sharp mind. He took over more and more of the ranch work as Owen got older, eventually becoming a full partner in the operation. Sarah was equally impressive, studying hard and eventually becoming a teacher herself, following in her mother's footsteps. She married a young lawyer from Santa Fe, a good man who treated her well, and they settled in Lordsburg so she could stay close to her parents. In 1898, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Owen and Amelia threw a big party at the ranch. Their children were there, along with grandchildren, James having married a local girl and given them 3 grandchildren in quick succession. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate with them, and there was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. As the sun began to set, Owen pulled Amelia away from the crowd and led her down to the creek, the same creek where he had pulled her from the flood all those years ago. A sturdy bridge now spanned the water, but the creek itself still ran clear and strong, swollen with spring snowmelt. 20 years, Owen said, wrapping his arms around Amelia from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. 20 years since you came into my life like a whirlwind, nearly drowning and completely upending everything I thought I knew about myself. Amelia laughed and leaned back against him, covering his hands with her own. 20 years since you grabbed me out of that water and refused to let go. Best thing that ever happened to me, nearly drowning that day. Best thing that ever happened to me too, Owen said softly. Though I would not recommend it as a way to meet your future spouse. They stood there as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, listening to the sounds of laughter and music drifting down from the house, surrounded by the life they had built together. It had not always been easy, this life of ranching and raising children in the wild New Mexico territory, but it had been good. It had been more than good. It had been everything. As they walked back up to the house hand in hand, Amelia thought about that terrified young woman who had been swept away in the spring flood, who had felt those strong fingers close around her wrist, and known she was going to be all right. That moment had changed everything, had set her on a path she never could have predicted but would not trade for anything in the world. She had been swept away by more than just the flood that day. She had been swept away by love, by fate, by the simple fact of Owen Quinlan being in the right place at the right time. And Owen, watching his wife laugh at something one of their grandchildren said, her face still as beautiful to him now as it had been 20 years ago, thought about how a single moment could change everything. How grabbing a stranger's wrist in a flooded creek could lead to a lifetime of happiness. How sometimes the best things in life came when you least expected them, when you simply acted on instinct and held on tight and refused to let go. The party lasted well into the night, and when it finally wound down and the last guest had departed, Owen and Amelia sat on their porch swing, gently rocking back and forth, watching the stars wheel overhead. Their children were putting the grandchildren to bed in the guest rooms, and for a moment, it was just the two of them, as it had been in the beginning. "I love you," Owen said, not for the first time that day, not for the first time that week, but meaning it just as much as he had every other time he had said those words. "I love you too," Amelia replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "Today and tomorrow and every day after that, always." They sat there in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a beautiful life together, who had loved each other through every challenge and triumph. The creek burbled in the distance, that same creek that had nearly taken Amelia from the world, but instead had brought her exactly where she was meant to be. And as the moon rose higher and the night grew deeper, Owen and Amelia remained on that porch swing, holding hands and counting their blessings, and knowing that their story, which had begun with a flood and a rescue, had become something far greater. It had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of being in the right place at the right time, to the courage it takes to grab hold of something precious and never let go. Years continued to pass in that easy, inevitable way they do, marked by seasons and celebrations, by births and losses, by the steady accumulation of shared memories that make up a life. Owen's hair turned silver, and Amelia's auburn locks faded to a soft gray touched brown, but the way they looked at each other never changed. There was still that spark, that connection forged in crisis and strengthened by decades of partnership. In 1905, when Owen was 53 and Amelia was 49, they took a trip together, leaving the ranch in James's capable hands and boarding a train to Boston so Amelia could show Owen where she had grown up. She had not been back since leaving for New Mexico all those years ago, and it was strange to walk those familiar streets with Owen by her side, to show him the house where she had lived, the school where she had trained to be a teacher. Everything seemed smaller than she remembered, more constrained, and she found herself grateful for the wide, open spaces of New Mexico, for the life she had chosen. They visited some of her old friends, women who had married well-to-do men and lived in fine houses with servants, and Amelia could see the questions in their eyes, the curiosity about whether she regretted her choices. But when Owen took her hand at dinner and smiled at her with all the love and warmth of their years together, Amelia knew without a doubt that she had made the right choice. These women might have fine houses and servants, but they did not have what she had. They did not have a love that had been tested and proven true, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. When they returned to New Mexico, to their ranch and their family, Amelia felt like she was coming home in a way that Boston had never been, even though she had lived there for 22 years. Home was not a place, she realized. Home was wherever Owen was, wherever their family was, wherever she could look out at the horizon and see the life they had built together stretching out before her. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, with Owen stepping back more and more as the years went on, content to offer advice when asked, but trusting his son to make his own decisions. Sarah gave them more grandchildren, and the house was often full of young voices and laughter, the sound of the next generation growing up surrounded by love and stability. Owen and Amelia became fixtures in Lordsburg, the kind of couple that everyone knew and respected. They were the ones people came to for advice, the ones who showed up when a neighbor needed help, the ones who exemplified what a good marriage looked like. They attended every town function, every church social, every school program where one of their grandchildren was performing. They were woven into the fabric of the community in a way that gave both of them deep satisfaction. On quiet evenings, which became more frequent as they grew older, Owen and Amelia would still sit on their porch swing and watch the sun set over the land they loved. They would talk about everything and nothing, comfortable with both conversation and silence, secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious in each other. "Do you remember," Amelia said one evening in the spring of 1910, 32 years after that fateful day by the creek, "how terrified I was when that bridge collapsed? How certain I was that I was going to die." "I remember," Owen said, his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. "I remember seeing you go under and thinking I might not reach you in time. I remember how scared I was." "And now here we are," Amelia said softly. 32 years later, with children and grandchildren and a life I could not have imagined back then. All because you grabbed my wrist and refused to let go." "Best decision I ever made," Owen said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Grabbing hold of you and never letting go." They sat there as the sky turned from blue to pink to purple to black, as the stars began to emerge one by one, as the familiar sounds of the ranch settled around them like a comfortable blanket. Inside the house, they could hear James and his wife getting their children ready for bed, the normal domestic sounds of a family at peace. "I would do it all again," Amelia said suddenly, turning to look at Owen in the starlight. "Every bit of it. The hard times and the good times and everything in between. I would choose you every single time." Owen cupped her face in his weathered hands, hands that had worked hard for decades, but could still be infinitely gentle. And I would ride alongside that creek every day for the rest of my life if it meant finding you again, he said. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Amelia Quinlan. My whole heart, my whole world. They kissed then, slow and sweet, a kiss that held 32 years of love and commitment and partnership. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling, and Amelia thought about how lucky she was, how incredibly fortunate to have been swept away in that spring flood and into this man's life. The years rolled on, as they always do, and Owen and Amelia grew old together with grace and dignity. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1928, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was enormous, people coming from all over New Mexico to honor this couple who had become legends in their own right, not because they had done anything extraordinary, but because they had loved each other so well and so completely for so long. Owen gave a speech at the party, his voice still strong despite his 76 years. 50 years ago, he said, looking at Amelia with eyes that still held that same spark of love, I married the woman who changed my life. She had come to New Mexico to be a teacher, but she ended up teaching me the most important lesson of all, that love is not something you find, it is something you build, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. Amelia, you have been my partner, my best friend, my reason for everything. Here is to 50 more years, if we are lucky enough to get them. Everyone cheered and raised their glasses, and Amelia stood and kissed her husband to the delight of the crowd. They cut the enormous cake that Sarah had organized. They danced to music played by a hired band. They basked in the love of their family and friends. It was a perfect day, a fitting celebration of a marriage that had endured and thrived for half a century. As the sun began to set on that golden anniversary day, Owen once again led Amelia down to the creek, walking slowly now, their steps not as sure as they once were, but still walking side by side, still together. The bridge was newer now, the third one built in their lifetime, sturdy and strong and built to last. They stood on it together, looking down at the water that flowed clear and steady below. You know, Owen said, his arm around Amelia's waist, I think about that day more often than you might expect. That moment when I grabbed your wrist and felt you grab back. I have wondered sometimes what would have happened if I had been 5 minutes later, if I had taken a different route, if I had not been there at all. Do not think about that, Amelia said firmly, turning to face him. You were there. You did grab me. That is what matters. We cannot change the past, and I would not want to even if we could. Everything that has happened since that day has been a gift, Owen. Every single day with you has been a gift. They stood there on the bridge as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, as the creek sang its eternal song below them, as the evening breeze carried the sounds of their family still celebrating up at the house. They had been through so much together, these two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. They had weathered droughts and floods, financial struggles and personal losses, the normal trials that come with building a life. But through it all, they had held on to each other, had chosen love over and over again, had built something beautiful and lasting. I love you, Amelia, Owen said, the same words he had spoken thousands of times over the years, but meaning them just as deeply now as he had the first time. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Owen, Amelia replied, her eyes bright with tears of happiness. You saved me that day by the creek, but you have been saving me every day since. You have been my rock, my safe harbor, my home. I could not have asked for a better life, a better partner, a better love. They walked back to the house hand in hand, moving slowly but steadily, Two people who had spent 50 years learning each other, loving each other, building a life together. Their family gathered around them as the evening wore on. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The legacy of that moment when Owen had grabbed Amelia's wrist and pulled her from the flood. As the party finally wound down and guests began to depart, as the family helped clean up and put things away, Owen and Amelia retreated to their bedroom, tired but happy. They got ready for bed in the comfortable silence of long marriage, each knowing where the other would be, what they would need, moving in harmony born of decades together. As they lay in bed that night, Amelia's head on Owen's shoulder, his arm around her, they talked quietly about the day, about how wonderful it had been to see everyone, about how blessed they were. And then, as sleep began to claim them, Owen said softly, "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than money. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for pulling me out of that flood," Amelia whispered back. "And thank you for never letting me go. Not for one single day in 50 years. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found each other against all odds and had built a love story worthy of the ages. Outside, the New Mexico night settled over the ranch, stars blazing in the clear sky, the creek singing its endless song, the land stretching out in all directions, wild and beautiful and home. And somewhere in the distance, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of that long-ago spring flood, the roar of water that had swept a young woman into a cowboy's life and changed both of them forever. It was a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying moments can lead to the most beautiful outcomes, that sometimes being swept away is exactly what needs to happen, that sometimes a strong hand reaching out to grab you is the beginning of everything that matters. Owen and Amelia Quinlan lived out the rest of their days on that ranch they had built together, surrounded by family and love and the satisfaction of a life well lived. They remained devoted to each other until the very end, still holding hands, still choosing love, still grateful for that day by the creek when their paths had crossed and their destinies had become forever intertwined. And when they finally passed, years later and within months of each other because neither could bear to be without the other for long, they left behind a legacy of love that would echo through generations, a testament to the power of holding on, of not letting go, of building something beautiful out of a moment of crisis, and a choice to love with everything you have.